The Waiting Shadows. Chapter 1. The First Footsteps. Mara had never been afraid of silence. She had spent enough nights alone in the apartment to know that creaking floorboards and the hum of the radiator were normal. But this night was different. She was curled under her blanket, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap in the hallway outside her bedroom. At first, she froze, straining to convince herself it was just the building settling. "Probably the old pipes," she muttered, her voice hoarse from talking to herself. But the footsteps continued, slow and measured, stopping just outside her bedroom door. Her pulse quickened. Mara climbed out of bed, pulling on her slippers. She opened the door slowly, half expecting, hoping that no one would be there. The hallway was empty. "Hello?" she called softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Only silence. She shook her head and returned to her room, telling herself she was imagining things. She climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. But as soon as her head touched the pillow, a whisper drifted across the room. "Don't sleep yet." Mara bolted upright. Her eyes darted around, but she was alone. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm alone. This isn't real." She lay back down, her mind racing. It's just stress, late nights at work, too many horror movies. But the footsteps returned, this time moving closer, brushing past her doorframe. They stopped again, and she heard it clearly. "Watch the walls. Watch the walls." She froze, her hands gripping the blanket. The walls? What does that even mean? Tentatively, she glanced at the corners of her room. The wallpaper, floral and pale, seemed normal. But as her eyes adjusted, the shadows deepened, curling at the edges like smoke. And then she saw it. A figure, pale, thin, pressed against the wallpaper. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes were hollow, dark voids. Mara gasped and blinked, and it was gone. Her heart thundering, she wrapped herself in the blanket, trying to rationalize what she had seen. It must have been a trick of the shadows, a reflection, something. But the whisper lingered in her ears, faint but insistent. Not yet. Not yet. For the rest of the night, Mara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the radiator sounded like footsteps creeping closer. And when the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, she noticed something new. A thin scratch along the wall, right where the figure had been. Mara's fingers trembled as she touched it. Impossible. She didn't remember it being there before. But she knew the truth. She wasn't alone. Chapter 2. Scratches in the Dark. Mara didn't sleep that day. She tried, truly, but the scratch on the wall refused to leave her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined those hollow eyes staring back at her. She paced the apartment, dragging her fingers over every corner, checking every shadow. Nothing moved. Nothing, except the scratching. She tried to laugh it off when her friend Lena called in the afternoon. "I'm fine," Mara said, her voice tight. "Just tired." "You sound exhausted. You need a break. Come over tonight. We'll watch movies. Just relax." "I can't," Mara said quickly, almost snapping. She hated lying, but she couldn't explain. They wouldn't believe me. "Maybe another time." After the call, she sank onto the couch, staring at the wall with the scratch. It was faint in the daylight, almost invisible. but she knew it had appeared overnight. "It's marking me," she thought, "tracking me." That evening, Mara tried to stay busy, cooking dinner, folding laundry, watching old sitcoms, but the silence of the apartment pressed in around her. She kept glancing at the corners of the room, expecting the shadow to reappear. Then she heard it. A soft knock on her bedroom door, not loud enough to be alarming, but deliberate. She froze, clutching a pair of scissors from the kitchen table. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. Nothing, just silence. Then the whisper, unmistakable. "Don't sleep yet. Look." Her heart pounding, Mara stepped toward the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. She crept along the carpet, listening. The knock came again, soft but insistent, then stopped. And she noticed something she hadn't before: faint smudges along the edge of the wall, like someone had been brushing their fingers across it. She reached out, trembling, and touched the marks. The cold ran through her fingertips like ice. And then she heard the whisper again, this time right behind her ear. "Closer." Mara spun around. Empty hallway. She backed into her bedroom, slamming the door shut. She pressed her back against it, breathing heavily. Her eyes darted to the corners of the room. Shadows shifted. She could feel them watching. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, she couldn't tell. Then, just as she began to relax, a new sound joined the whispers. Faint scratching, like nails over wood coming from the floor beneath her bed. "No, no, no, no," she whispered. She leaned forward, peering under the bed. Nothing, just dust and a single abandoned sock. But when she pulled back, she caught a flicker at the corner of her eye. The wallpaper moved. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The pale figure pressed itself against the pattern, tilting its head unnaturally, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. Mara screamed, stumbling backward into the dresser. The figure vanished, leaving only another thin scratch on the wall where it had been. She sank to the floor, shaking. The whisper came one last time before the night ended. Faint, but clear. "We are patient." Mara wrapped herself in blankets, too terrified to sleep, too exhausted to move. She knew it was only the beginning. Whatever this was, it had marked her, and it wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 3: The Watching Shadows. The next morning, Mara woke to sunlight spilling through her curtains, yet the apartment felt heavier than ever. Shadows clung to the corners like thick smoke. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the lingering sense of being watched, but the scratches on the walls, faint now in daylight, seemed to gleam as if alive. She went about her morning routine mechanically, trying to ignore the unease crawling up her spine. But even while brushing her teeth, she felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, like someone's eyes were boring through her. Mara spun around. Nothing, only the reflection of her own pale face in the mirror. The whisper came almost immediately. "Look closer." Her heart leapt. She leaned toward the mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the figure. The reflection remained empty, but her breath fogged the glass, and something moved beneath the fog, a shadow that didn't belong to her. She blinked, and it was gone. Mara decided she needed help. She called Lena again, this time ready to admit something. "Lena, something's happening," she said, her voice tight, trembling. I don't know, there's something in my apartment." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" Lena asked cautiously. It's like," Shadows, moving. I see things, and there are scratches on my walls, and Mara's voice broke. It whispers to me at night. I can't sleep. Lena's silence was heavy. Mara, maybe you're just stressed. I mean, you've been working a lot, and... No, Mara shouted, cutting her off. This is real. I'm not imagining it. Okay, Lena said softly. Just try to stay calm. Maybe I can come over tonight. We can figure this out together. Mara hung up, not fully reassured. Calm? How could she be calm when something unseen was always watching? The evening came, long and slow. Every creak of the floorboards sent her heart racing. She kept checking every corner, every shadow, every dark pattern on the wallpaper. She even placed a chair in front of the bedroom door, a flimsy barricade against whatever waited on the other side. But barricades couldn't stop whispers. Closer, closer. It was patient, teasing, moving just beyond her sight. Mara's hands shook as she grabbed a notebook and a pen, deciding to record every event. Maybe writing it down would make it less real, or at least give her control. Footsteps at midnight. Stopped outside my bedroom. Whisper, "Don't sleep yet." Scratch appeared near corner of room. Shadow figure visible, pale, hollow eyes. She paused, shivering. Writing made it tangible, and that was terrifying. Hours passed. She tried staying awake, forcing herself to read old books and scrolling aimlessly on her phone. But the apartment's darkness grew thick and suffocating, a living presence pressing against her skin. Then she saw movement in the corner of her eye, a flicker, pale against the wall. She froze. The figure pressed itself against the wallpaper again, tilting its head, its hollow eyes staring straight at her. Mara screamed, throwing her notebook across the room. The figure vanished, but the whisper returned, soft and mocking, always watching. She sank into the chair, trembling, too exhausted to move, and in that exhaustion, sleep found her. That night, she dreamed of endless hallways, of walls that breathe and whisper, of shadows pressing close, of hollow eyes staring from every corner. When she woke, she found new scratches along her walls, deeper and darker than before. The figure was no longer just in her room. It had spread, marking her entire apartment, and Mara realized, with cold certainty, that she wasn't merely being watched. She was being claimed. Chapter 4. Shadows in the History. The next morning, Mara felt hollow, her body heavy from exhaustion, her mind spinning from restless dreams. She hadn't slept properly in days, and every shadow in the apartment seemed to crawl closer the moment she blinked. Determined to understand what was happening, she decided to investigate the history of the building. Perhaps there was something in the past that explained the scratches, the whispers, the hollow-eyed figure. Mara bundled herself into a jacket and headed to the local library. The building was old, a brick-and-mortar relic surrounded by newer apartments, its wooden floors creaking with every step. She approached the clerk, a tired woman with glasses perched on her nose. "Excuse me," Mara said cautiously. "I'm researching the history of 42 Pine Street. Do you have any records, old tenant lists, incidents, anything unusual?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. 42 Pine? That building's been around a long time. Some records, yes. There were a few reports, fires, accidents, and a few unsolved disappearances, actually. Mara's heart thumped. Disappearances? Yes. Nothing recent, mostly decades ago. But some tenants vanished mysteriously. No trace, just gone. The clerk frowned. Old rumors mostly. People talked about strange noises, shadows moving in the walls, whispers at night. Mara felt her stomach drop. Whispers, shadows. She asked to see the records. Hours passed as she pored over yellowed newspaper clippings and tenant logs. One name caught her eye: Eleanor Whitecomb, a tenant from the 1920s. Her apartment had been 3B, the unit directly above Mara's. Reports described Eleanor disappearing overnight, her bedroom untouched except for scratches on the walls. Witnesses claimed to have heard whispers in the hallways. Mara's hands shook as she traced the lines in the old documents. She realized the pattern. Every few decades, someone in the building experienced the same haunting: shadows, whispers, scratches, and then disappeared. She left the library with a growing sense of dread, clutching the photocopies to her chest. On the walk home, the streets seemed narrower, the shadows deeper, as if the city itself were conspiring to keep her in suspense. Back in her apartment, the sun was setting. Mara tried to convince herself she had been careful, that the building's past didn't mean the figure in her room was real. But as the light faded, she felt it again: the prickling sensation, the awareness of being observed. "Not yet," whispered a voice from the hallway, soft but sharp. Mara froze. She hadn't even noticed the sun had disappeared entirely. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the corners of her room, sweeping across the walls. At first, nothing. Then, movement. The figure. Pale, thin, its head tilting inhumanly, pressed against the wall near the ceiling this time, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. Mara stammered, "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, the scratches on the wall seemed to move, etching themselves deeper, forming shapes she couldn't recognize. The whispering returned, more insistent. Closer, closer, always. The air turned colder, the shadows stretching unnaturally. Mara backed toward the door, tripping over a chair, her heart hammering. But the figure didn't move, didn't need to. It was everywhere at once, a presence she could feel pressing into her skin. She fled to the living room, phone in hand, ready to call Lena. But when she tried, the screen went black. The whispers swirled around her, a low hum now. "We are patient. We always wait." Mara sank to the floor, pressing her back against the wall, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She realized with horror that the building's history wasn't a warning. It was a record, a pattern, and she was now a part of it. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, the real storm had already begun. Chapter 5. Blurring Reality. Sleep had become impossible. Mara wandered through her apartment like a ghost, exhausted and hollow-eyed, every shadow now a potential threat. Even during the day, the figure lingered, pressing just beyond the edges of her vision. Every time she turned her head, it vanished, but the whispers followed, insistent, curling around her thoughts like smoke. Closer, always closer. She tried leaving the apartment, convincing herself that the outside world would break the cycle. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, the floorboards creaked in an eerily familiar rhythm, like the footsteps of someone or something following her. "Stop," she whispered under her breath, clutching her coat tightly. But the footsteps didn't stop. At work, she tried to concentrate. Emails, spreadsheets, phone calls, mundane tasks that normally grounded her. But every flicker of light, every shadow in the corner of her office made her flinch. She saw it there sometimes, pressed against the wall or the glass partition, a pale figure, tilting its head unnaturally, hollow eyes boring into her. Her co-workers noticed. "You okay, Mara?" her colleague Jenna asked, frowning. "You look tired. You've been spacing out all morning." "I'm fine," Mara said quickly, forcing a smile. But she wasn't. The figure wasn't just in her apartment. It followed her everywhere. She could feel it lurking in the corners, patient, watching. That night, she returned home to find new scratches etched across the hallways, deeper than ever. Her apartment no longer felt familiar. Every room seemed larger, darker, the corners stretching and twisting in impossible ways. She tried blocking her bedroom door with furniture again, but when she woke in the middle of the night, the chair had been moved. The whisper came from the far side of the room, closer than ever. We are patient. We wait. We see. Mara's eyes darted around in the dim moonlight. The figure pressed itself against the wall, taller than before, its thin fingers scraping across the wallpaper. Its hollow eyes stared directly into hers. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. No answer, only the sound of the scratches growing, spreading across walls and floorboards. She could almost hear them writing her name, carving it into the apartment itself. Desperate, she tried leaving again, grabbing her keys and rushing toward the door. But the hallway seemed to stretch, elongate unnaturally, turning familiar turns into endless corridors. The whisper followed her, wrapping around her mind. "You belong here, like the others." She slammed the door behind her, pressing her forehead against the cold wood. Her breathing came in short, shallow bursts. She realized she wasn't just being haunted. Her reality itself was being rewritten, reshaped by something ancient, patient, and malevolent. Mara sank to the floor, clutching her knees. The whisper grew softer, almost gentle, but no less menacing. "Sleep when the time comes." And in the silence that followed, Mara understood the terrifying truth. She wasn't just being watched, she was being prepared. The figure wasn't just in her apartment, it was in her mind. Chapter 6. Confronting the Silence. The following morning, Mara awoke to a room that felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves had pressed in during the night. She rubbed her eyes, but the lingering sense of being watched refused to fade. The scratches on the walls had multiplied, forming patterns she couldn't decipher. Lines that curved like veins, letters that almost spelled something she couldn't read. She paced the room, restless, and muttered to herself, "I can't just sit here. I have to do something." Her first thought was research. She needed more than old records and library archives. Maybe there was a book, a ritual, an account of someone who had survived this presence. Her fingers shook as she scoured the internet, forums, and occult archives. Every mention of similar phenomena ended in the same way: disappearance, madness, or worse. By late afternoon, desperation had overtaken caution. Mara decided she had to confront it. She gathered salt, candles, and mirrors, anything she could use to feel in control, and lit the apartment with dim, trembling lights. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the radiator. "If you're here, show yourself. I'm not hiding anymore." For a long moment, nothing happened. The apartment seemed to exhale, the shadows stretching toward her. Then, a soft scratching, low and deliberate, moving across the walls and ceiling. Mara's breath caught. The figure appeared, pressed against the wallpaper near the doorway. Pale, thin, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. It tilted its head, slowly, almost in mockery. "Why are you here?" Mara demanded, holding a candle toward it. The flame flickered, casting long, quivering shadows. The whisper returned, distant but unmistakable. "We wait. We always wait, until the chosen opens their eyes." Mara swallowed hard. "Chosen? What do you mean?" No answer, only movement. The scratches on the walls seemed to shift, forming shapes and symbols that writhed in the candlelight. She realized with a shiver that the apartment itself was responding to the presence. Walls, floorboards, even the air seemed alive, reshaping itself to communicate. She remembered the mirrors and placed one carefully on the floor, angled toward the doorway. The figure approached, slowly, deliberately. When it saw the mirror, it recoiled for a fraction of a second, but only briefly. It tilted its head again, as if amused, then pressed forward. Mara's heart raced. The whispering grew louder, now surrounding her from every corner. Closer, closer, always. She backed away, tripping over the chair she had moved earlier. The candle toppled, flames licking the floorboards. Panic surged. She grabbed the mirror and held it like a shield. The figure reached toward her, but instead of hands, thin shadows extended, sliding along the floor, across the walls, curling around her ankles. Mara screamed, backing into the far corner of the room. "No, I'm not yours." The shadows recoiled slightly at her words. The whispers softened, almost curious. "You fight, yet you cannot escape." And then, as quickly as it had begun, the figure vanished, leaving the apartment silent. The scratches remained, deeper now, almost etched into the walls. Prepare, the time comes. Mara sank to the floor, shaking and exhausted. She knew that this confrontation had changed nothing. The figure had tested her, taunted her, and left its mark. It was patient. And Mara realized with cold clarity that she had only begun to understand the rules of its presence. Chapter 7. Dreams of the Shadows. That night, Mara lay on her bed, the apartment eerily quiet except for the soft hum of the radiator. She was too exhausted to sleep, yet too afraid to stay awake. Every creak, every distant sound made her flinch, anticipating the figure's return. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into sleep, but it was not the peaceful kind. The moment her eyes closed, she found herself in a hallway she had never seen before. Long, narrow, impossibly deep, stretching into darkness. The walls were covered in the same pale floral wallpaper from her apartment, but twisted, curling, as if alive. At the end of the hallway, a faint light flickered. Mara walked toward it, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. The whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever. Closer, closer, always closer. She tried to run, but the hallway elongated, pulling her steps farther from the light. Shadows crawled along the walls, thin and twisting, forming shapes she could almost recognize. Figures pressed against the wallpaper, tilting their heads, hollow eyes staring into hers. "Stop!" she screamed, but no sound left her lips. The whispers intensified. "You cannot escape. You are ours. The chosen sees." Ahead, she saw the figure again. Pale, thin, its head tilted unnaturally. Its hollow eyes seemed deeper in this dream space, sucking the dim light around them. Mara reached for it, but the shadows in the hallway reached back, wrapping around her ankles, dragging her toward the walls. She awoke with a start, heart racing, body drenched in sweat. The apartment was silent, or so it seemed. But the moment she looked around, she noticed something impossible. New scratches on the bedroom walls, shapes that mirrored the twisted wallpaper from her dream. The figure had been in her apartment while she slept. Terrified, she grabbed her phone to call Lena, but the battery was dead. The blinds were drawn, though she hadn't touched them. And in the corner of the room, the shadow lingered, almost imperceptible. She could feel its gaze, patient, waiting. Mara realized the figure was no longer confined to corners or walls. It could seep into her dreams, manipulate her perception, and leave physical traces behind. The line between waking and sleeping was gone. Days passed, or maybe nights, she couldn't tell. Each time she closed her eyes, the figure returned in new forms, pressed against the ceiling, crawling along the floor, stretching impossibly thin across the walls. Whispers followed her everywhere, growing more insistent, more coherent. "Prepare, you will see. The time comes." Mara began documenting everything in a notebook, desperate for control. Every scratch, every movement, every whisper. Patterns emerged, symbols repeating themselves. She traced them obsessively, hoping to understand the figure's purpose, to find a way to protect herself. But the more she wrote, the more she realized the figure was teaching her, guiding her, shaping her. Its patience was infinite, its intelligence terrifying. Mara had been marked. She wasn't merely haunted, she was being prepared. And in her dreams, the hallway stretched farther, darker, whispering her name. Soon, soon, we are patient. Mara shivered beneath the covers. Sleep had become a trap, and the shadows were patient teachers. Chapter 8. Signs and Symbols. The exhaustion had started to eat at Mara's mind. Every waking moment was heavy with dread, every shadow a threat. She had tried ignoring the scratches, barricading doors, and even confronting the figure directly, but nothing had worked. The presence had grown stronger, more insistent, and now it invaded her dreams. If she had any hope of survival, she knew she needed knowledge, old, hidden knowledge. That night, she returned to the library, retracing her steps to the archives. The clerk eyed her warily as she requested texts on local occult practices, warding rituals, and ancient protective symbols. "There's not much here," the clerk said, cautiously, gesturing to a shelf of old leather-bound books. "Most of this is folklore, superstition. People have always tried to ward off spirits and shadows, but, well, it's not exactly proven." Mara didn't care about proof. She needed answers. Hours passed as she pored over texts filled with strange symbols, protective circles, and incantations meant to bind restless spirits. One book, older than any she had seen, caught her attention. Its pages were brittle, its ink faded, but one line leapt out at her. "The patient shadows seek the chosen. Only by recognizing their marks and confronting the pattern can one survive the waiting." Her pulse quickened. Marks, patterns, the scratches on her walls. She pulled out her notebook and compared her own recordings. The symbols etched by the figure seemed to correspond to something, an order, a code, a path. She realized she needed to map the scratches, the shapes, and the whispers. Perhaps understanding the pattern would give her leverage. That night, she returned to her apartment, armed with chalk, candles, and mirrors. She traced every scratch she had documented, arranging them in circles and lines along the walls and floor. The whispering began almost immediately, soft at first. Watching, learning, always. The temperature dropped, her breath misting in the candlelight. Shadows moved independently of their sources, twisting along the walls. The figure appeared, pressed against the ceiling this time, tilting its head. Hollow eyes glimmered in the dim light, watching every movement. "Show me," Mara whispered, clutching her notebook. "Show me what you want. I'm not afraid." The shadows recoiled slightly, then surged forward, pressing across the floor like liquid darkness. The scratches along the walls seemed to writhe and shift, forming symbols she hadn't noticed before. Triangles within circles, lines connecting points, almost like a map or a warning. The whisper intensified, surrounding her. "Prepare, follow, see the path. The chosen opens eyes." Mara shivered, tracing the symbols with trembling hands. She began to sense the pattern, the order behind the chaos. The figure wasn't random. It was patient, intelligent, shaping her understanding, teaching her the rules of its presence. Hours passed in tense silence. The figure pressed closer, testing her resolve, its whispers flowing through her mind. Mara realized something horrifying. She wasn't learning these patterns by accident. She was being guided. The figure wanted her to see, to understand, and soon, to act. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, Mara's fingers were raw, the chalk dust covering her hands. She stepped back and examined her work. The symbols traced across walls, floor, and ceiling. And for the first time, she felt a sliver of control. Small, fragile but real. The figure watched from the corner, patient, silent, as if acknowledging her progress. But the whisper lingered, echoing softly through the apartment. Soon, very soon, the waiting ends. Mara realized the shadows weren't just tormenting her, they were preparing her. Chapter 9. The First Ritual. Mara spent the next day preparing. She cleaned her apartment meticulously, arranging candles at the corners of each room and drawing the protective circles she had traced from her notes. Salt lined the edges of the floors, mirrors angled to reflect every corner. The scratches along the walls, which had once been chaotic, now formed a pattern she could follow. A map, a ritual, a defense. Her hands trembled as she lit the first candle. Shadows in the corners shifted almost immediately, drawn toward the light and symbols. The whispering began, soft but insistent. Closer. You think you know. You will learn. Mara whispered in return, almost defiantly. I am not yours. I am not afraid. The shadows recoiled slightly, but the figure appeared nonetheless, pressing against the wall near the ceiling. Its hollow eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, tilting its head in curiosity. Taking a deep breath, Mara began the ritual, reciting the words she had copied from the ancient text, tracing her fingers along the symbols in a precise sequence. The apartment seemed to breathe around her, the air thickening, the temperature dropping, the shadows pulsing. The whisper grew louder, wrapping around her mind. You cannot stop what is patient. You cannot escape what is chosen. Mara pressed on, her voice shaking but determined. The symbols began to glow faintly, a soft golden light emanating from the chalk on the walls and floor. The figure writhed in the corners, as if resisting the ritual, but it did not flee. Then the shadows surged, filling the room like liquid darkness, pressing toward her. Mara held her ground, tracing the final symbols. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices overlapping. Closer, closer, see, follow. Suddenly, the figure lunged from the wall, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally. Mara stumbled back, dropping the chalk. But as the shadow reached her, it collided with the protective circle and recoiled violently, letting out a soundless screech that vibrated through the apartment. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows shivered and recoiled, the whispers stilled, and the figure hovered at the edges of the circle, its hollow eyes fixed on her. Mara's chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline mingling as she realized the ritual had worked, at least partially. But the figure did not vanish. It lingered, watching, patient, its hollow gaze promising that this confrontation was only the beginning. The whispers returned, softer now, almost contemplative. You learn. You fight. Soon, you will understand. The chosen sees. Mara sank to the floor, exhausted and trembling. She had made progress, gained a measure of control, but the presence was still there, still patient, still waiting. And she understood, with a cold certainty, that this battle was not just for her apartment, or her safety, or even her mind. It was for her very soul. Chapter 10. Reality Unraveling. The night after her first successful ritual, Mara felt a fragile sense of victory, but it was quickly replaced by unease. The apartment seemed different, not safer. The shadows lingered longer, their edges sharper, curling in ways they hadn't before. The scratches on the walls were deeper now, forming new patterns she hadn't traced or seen before. Even the familiar objects in her apartment seemed wrong. The coffee mug on the counter was slightly taller than it had been yesterday. The floorboards creaked in ways that didn't match the weight of her steps. Mara blinked and swore she saw the hallway stretch farther than it should, the end vanishing into darkness. She shook her head. "I'm tired. I'm imagining it." But the whispers returned as soon as she sat down, softer at first, almost teasing. "Closer, always closer. The chosen sees." Mara's pulse quickened. She grabbed her notebook and chalk, frantically mapping the new scratches, trying to discern the pattern. But the more she studied them, the less sense they made. Lines curved into impossible shapes, triangles nested in circles, spirals that seemed to move when she looked away. Then she saw it, the figure again, pressed against the ceiling near the corner, taller and thinner than ever, tilting its head as if amused. Its hollow eyes glimmered with intelligence. Mara felt its gaze penetrate her skull, unraveling her thoughts, testing her resolve. "You're not real," she whispered, gripping her chalk. The shadows pulsed violently, coiling around the edges of the room, and the whispering intensified, now overlapping voices. "You cannot deny. You are chosen. You belong." Mara's chalk slipped from her hand as the room seemed to tilt, walls bending, ceiling stretching impossibly high. Objects she had placed for the ritual shifted, chairs leaning at impossible angles, mirrors reflecting not her room, but infinite hallways lined with shadowed figures, all staring with hollow eyes. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She realized the figure wasn't just in the apartment, it was in her mind, her perception, reshaping reality itself. Every line, every shadow, every flicker of light became a tool of its manipulation. Desperate, Mara tried to speak the protective incantation again, tracing the symbols on the floor with trembling hands. The golden light glowed faintly, pushing the shadows back, but only slightly. The figure hissed silently, pressing against the walls, ceiling, and floor simultaneously, as if it had become one with the apartment. Mara fell to her knees, overwhelmed. She understood now that she had gained a measure of control, but the figure's patience was infinite. Every minor victory only fueled its presence, shaping her, testing her, guiding her towards something she could not yet comprehend. The whispers softened, almost gentle. "We are patient. The chosen sees. Soon all will unfold." Mara sank into the chalk-dusted floor, trembling. She had survived the night, but reality had been warped around her. Sleep, waking, even thought itself had become dangerous. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the waiting, her waiting, was only beginning. Chapter 11. The Walls Speak. The following morning, Mara awoke to a silence that felt wrong, too complete, too heavy. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, but even the light seemed muted, as though it were passing through a filter of shadow. The scratches on her walls had multiplied overnight, curling in patterns she hadn't traced. Some of the lines seemed to form letters or words, but every time she tried to read them, they blurred before her eyes. Mara shivered, wrapping herself in a blanket, trying to convince herself she could still fight. Today, she decided, she would take aggressive action. She would push back. She would reclaim her apartment. She set up the candles, mirrors, and chalk circles again, but this time she added more. Symbols on every wall, every corner, even around the windows. Salt lines were doubled, forming intricate labyrinths across the floor. She lit each candle, murmuring the protective incantation she had memorized, tracing the symbols carefully with her hands. For hours she worked, sweating and trembling. The apartment seemed to respond. The shadows hesitated at the edges, the air thick but pliable. She whispered to herself, "I am not yours. You will not control me." The figure appeared eventually, emerging from a corner near the ceiling, pale, elongated, its hollow eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence. Its head tilted slowly, mockingly. Mara felt a cold, penetrating awareness, as if it could see every thought, every fear, every hidden doubt. "You cannot win," the whisper said, now multiple voices overlapping, coming from every direction. "You belong, as all chosen do. The waiting is infinite." Mara's pulse raced. She pressed forward with the ritual, following the patterns, reciting the incantations, tracing the symbols faster. The figure moved closer, its shadows sliding along the walls like liquid, stretching toward her feet, then recoiling when they met the chalk boundaries. Hours passed. Time seemed meaningless. The shadows grew more restless, twisting and writhing as if in agony. Mara's voice grew hoarse, but she continued, her hands raw from chalk dust, her body trembling from exhaustion. Then something changed. The scratches on the walls began to glow faintly, lines twisting into symbols she had never seen before. The whispers paused, and for the first time, the apartment seemed still, suspended, holding its breath. The figure hovered near the ceiling, motionless, its hollow eyes watching. Mara felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, she thought, she could finally force it back. But just as quickly, the whispers returned, soft and patient. "The chosen sees. The waiting ends. Soon." Mara realized the terrifying truth. This battle was not about driving it away. It was about understanding it, following its rules, surviving its tests. Every ritual, every symbol, every act of defiance only deepened the connection between her and the figure. She was being prepared for something she did not yet comprehend. Her hands shook as she sank to the floor, leaning against the chalked circle. Exhaustion claimed her, but sleep refused. Outside, the sun had set, though it felt like hours hadn't passed. Inside, the shadows pulsed softly, waiting, patient, eternal. And Mara knew, with every fiber of her being, that the figure's patience far outlasted hers. Chapter 12. In Every Corner. The next morning, Mara awoke to a world subtly altered. The apartment felt tighter, the air heavier, as though the shadows had seeped into the walls themselves. Even the sunlight seemed muted, filtered through a strange gray haze. Every familiar object, the couch, the table, the mirrors, appeared slightly wrong, tilted or elongated in ways her mind could not fully process. Mara shivered and pulled on a sweater. She realized with a sinking feeling that the figure's influence had grown beyond the boundaries of her apartment. She could feel it in the hallway outside, in the thin cracks beneath her door, in the shadows stretching across the floorboards. She tried leaving, hoping the outside world would restore some semblance of normalcy. But as soon as she stepped into the street, the shadows followed. Not in the literal sense, but in the subtle distortions of her vision. Buildings seemed to lean, streetlights flickered in impossible rhythms, and every passerby's gaze felt unnaturally intent, as though they were watching her more closely than reality should allow. At work, the effect was worse. Computer screens flickered with faint shapes in the corner of her vision. Office walls seemed to pulse slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. Colleagues whispered behind her, though she couldn't catch the words. Each sound seemed to echo unnaturally, stretching longer than physics would allow. Mara's notebook had become her anchor. She documented everything obsessively, sketching symbols, tracking patterns, tracing lines she didn't fully understand. She compared the symbols to the scratches in her apartment and the shapes she had seen in her dreams. Slowly, an order emerged, a sequence, a path, something that seemed designed to teach her. But the figure was no longer confined to corners or walls. It had begun to invade her perception, bending her reality to its will. Every mirror, Every reflective surface, every flicker of light became a tool of its manipulation. Mara could no longer trust her own senses. That night, she returned to her apartment, determined to reinforce the ritual circles and symbols. Candles flickered as she moved, shadows stretching across the walls in impossible angles. The figure appeared at the ceiling, taller and thinner than ever, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You follow the path," the whisper said, soft and patient. "You learn. You understand. Soon." Mara gritted her teeth. "I will survive this. I will not belong to you." The figure tilted its head, silent but observing. Its shadow stretched across the floor toward her, thin and twisting, testing the boundaries of the chalk circle. Mara felt the air thicken, a pressure in her chest, as though the apartment itself were pressing against her. She realized with a shiver of horror that this was not just a haunting. The figure was teaching her. Every fear, every whisper, every distortion of reality was a lesson. She was being prepared for something she could not yet understand. As she sank to the floor, exhausted, she heard the whisper one last time before the night fully fell. Soon, the chosen sees. The waiting ends. Mara clutched her notebook tightly. She was trapped between waking and sleeping, between reality and shadow, and the figure waited patiently, always patient, in every corner. Chapter 13. The Old Records. Mara spent the next day poring over more historical archives, desperate to understand the figure that had taken over her life. The library was quiet, the scent of old paper and dust heavy in the air. She pulled old building records, newspapers, and personal letters from decades past, searching for any mention of shadows, disappearances, or strange occurrences. Most of the files were mundane, rent payments, maintenance requests, but a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades, a tenant reported whispers, shadows, scratches on the walls, or dreams that felt real enough to leave physical traces. And each of these tenants eventually vanished. One entry made Mara's blood run cold. It described a tenant named Eleanor Whitecomb from the 1920s who had disappeared from apartment 3B, directly above Mara's unit. Her bedroom was found intact, but the walls were covered in scratches and strange symbols similar to the ones Mara had traced herself. Witnesses claimed they had heard whispers in the hallway at night, warning of a presence that waited for the chosen. The phrase chilled Mara. The chosen. Another set of documents described a series of tenants who had survived initial contact with the shadows. They had documented their encounters, leaving journals filled with protective symbols, rituals, and observations. But all notes ended abruptly, often mid-sentence, as if something had interrupted them. Mara realized with growing horror that the building itself seemed alive, feeding off the tenants, selecting a new chosen every few decades. And now it had selected her. She dug further and found letters from one survivor, a man named Thomas Granger from the 1950s. He described a pale figure with hollow eyes, patient and intelligent, pressing against the walls, manipulating dreams, and bending reality. He claimed that survival depended on recognizing patterns, documenting everything, and performing protective rituals. But even then, the shadows would test the mind, pushing the chosen to exhaustion, fear, and despair. Mara's hands trembled as she read. Every detail mirrored her own experiences. The scratches, the whispers, the dreams. It was all the same. And she understood, with chilling clarity, that she was part of a cycle that had repeated for nearly a century. Returning to her apartment that evening, she noticed the shadows had shifted. The scratches on the walls were deeper, forming new complex patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. The figure appeared at the ceiling, taller and thinner than ever, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You see the path," the whisper said. "You understand. You are chosen. Soon all will be revealed." Mara sank to the floor, her mind racing. The building, the figure, the patterns, it was all part of a design she was only beginning to comprehend. And she realized with cold certainty that understanding was not enough. She would need to act, and soon, before the waiting ended and the figure claimed its due. Chapter 14. Tests of Patience. The night after uncovering the building's dark history, Mara prepared herself for the figure's inevitable return. She arranged her protective circles, chalked intricate symbols across the floors and walls, and lined the windows with salt. Candles flickered in every corner, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally, as if testing her resolve. She whispered the incantation she had memorized, her voice shaky but determined. I am not yours. I will not belong to you. I am the chosen, and I will survive. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the whispers returned, faint but insistent. Closer, closer. The chosen sees. We wait. The figure appeared at the ceiling, pale and elongated, its hollow eyes gleaming in the candlelight. Its head tilted unnaturally, and Mara realized it was studying her, testing her patience, her fear, her understanding of the symbols she had drawn. Show yourself, she demanded, gripping a candle like a weapon. If you want me, then face me. The shadow surged, sliding along the walls and floor. Mara's protective circles glowed faintly, resisting the figure's intrusion. But it did not retreat. It pressed closer, its whispering growing louder, more insistent. You follow the path. You learn. You endure. Soon. Hours passed. Mara's body ached, her voice was hoarse, and her hands were raw from tracing the symbols. The figure tested her relentlessly, moving in ways that defied logic, through walls, across ceilings, stretching and bending. Every time she thought she had control, it shifted, probing for weakness. At one point, the figure pressed itself so close that Mara could feel a chill seep into her bones. She screamed, but her words seemed to have no power. The shadows recoiled slightly when they hit the chalk circles, but the figure hovered just beyond them, patient, waiting for her to falter. Through the long night, Mara realized the figure's goal was not destruction. It was teaching, preparing, shaping her understanding. Every whisper, every scratch, every distortion of reality was a lesson, a test of endurance, a measure of her ability to survive. As dawn approached, Mara slumped to the floor, exhausted but resolute. The figure remained at the ceiling, watching silently. The whispers softened. You endure. You see. The chosen understands. Soon, the waiting ends. Mara clutched her notebook, filled with sketches, symbols, and notes from the night. She understood that survival was not about strength or fearlessness. It was patience, observation, and understanding the figure's rules. And she knew that the coming nights would demand more from her than she had ever imagined. Chapter 15. The Chosen. The apartment was silent when Mara woke that morning, though silence no longer meant safety. Years, or perhaps only days, of exhaustion had blurred the edges of time. She could not tell how long she had fought, traced symbols, endured whispers, and faced the figure's relentless tests. The scratches on the walls had formed a web of knowledge, patterns she now understood instinctively. Mara rose, her body trembling, but her mind clear. The figure had always been patient. It had shaped her, guided her, and tested her endurance. And now, she realized, the waiting had reached its end. The shadows shifted softly in the corners, the figure emerging at the ceiling. Its hollow eyes glimmered, reflecting the chalked symbols that now glowed faintly with a golden light. Mara stood in the center of the largest circle she had drawn, heart steady, hands raised. "You've waited long enough," she whispered, voice calm, firm. "I understand. I see the pattern. I am ready." The figure tilted its head, observing. The whispers swirled around her, overlapping, soft but insistent. "The chosen. The waiting ends. You see. You endure." Mara raised her hand and traced the final symbol in the circle, a complex intertwining of lines, triangles, and spirals. The apartment shivered, air thickening, shadows quivering. The figure descended slowly, its form stretching impossibly, then solidifying near the center of the room. "You are the chosen," it whispered, hollow and patient. "You see. You belong." Mara met its gaze, hollow eyes meeting hollow eyes. She did not flinch. Instead, she whispered, "I endure. I see. I belong. Only to myself." The shadows recoiled, then merged back into the figure, forming a single twisting mass that hovered in the air. The whispers softened, then faded entirely. The scratches on the walls stopped growing. The symbols no longer shifted. The apartment exhaled a quiet calm, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Mara sank to the floor, exhausted but alive. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the apartment felt like her own space again. She touched the walls, tracing the intricate web of symbols she had created, marks that no longer threatened her, but told a story of survival, patience, and understanding. The figure had not left, it could not leave, but it no longer threatened her. Mara had survived its lessons. She had endured his patience, understood its patterns, and emerged on the other side stronger, prepared, and unclaimed. The whispers were gone, replaced by silence that felt safe, permanent. Mara knew the shadows would always linger, waiting for another chosen, another cycle. But she had passed through, and the figure had acknowledged her strength. Mara rose slowly, exhausted but resolved. She stepped through the apartment, her hands brushing against the chalked walls, tracing the patterns one last time. Outside, the sun rose, light spilling into the city, and she felt it, not fear, not dread, but clarity. She had faced the waiting, she had survived, and she was free.